When you can remove all the marble that's obscuring who you truly are, you will show up magnificently and powerfully as yourself. And then we can all, the whole world, can admire who you truly are as an original. Welcome to Breakthrough Mode, the podcast where we intentionally get into the driver's seat of our lives, shift out of monotony and mediocrity, and step on the gas towards becoming the person we were always meant to become. Hello and welcome to episode 210 on the Breakthrough Mode podcast. I am your host, Megan Bauer. Thank you so much for joining me and pushing play on today's episode. When this episode airs, it will be the first Friday of 2026. And the first Friday of the year has become really special to me because I published the first episode of the podcast that I then called From Impossible to Inevitable. I published the very first episode on the first Friday of 2023, and now we have 3 solid years behind us, and we are embarking on the 4th year together, which is so exciting. So as I was wrapping up the episodes for 2025 and the Becoming series that I created, I've had this episode on my heart and on my mind almost the entire time, and I knew I wanted it for this very first Friday of 2026. So often when a new year starts, there's this thing that goes around that people say, that companies say, oftentimes they're gyms, and they say, new year, new you. I've never really liked that phrase. I don't like the vibe and the energy of it. When I think of, getting something new, it's usually because the thing I've had, the old thing, isn't working for me anymore. Maybe it's worn out. Maybe it's broken. Maybe I'm just tired of it. And I don't ever want that vibe to be about myself. Like, sure, there are things that I want to work on and improve on. There's progress to be made. And I've done a lot of work up to this point, and there's a lot there that's great and that's good. And I'm not going to scrap the whole thing because there are still places that need improvement. So when I was thinking about what I would say instead, I came up with New Year, More You. And I want to start talking about this with a great illustrative story. So I don't know if this is actually 100% real or not, and that doesn't really matter because it's still a great analogy that we're going to put into place. It's still a great story to ponder on, okay? So I have studied a lot of art and a lot of art history, and I have loved all of that. And in that, I heard this story, or I read this story somewhere. I don't know where, because it's been with me forever, it feels like. I've heard this story about Michelangelo after he created David. David is this massive sculpture made out of Carrara marble. It's over 17 feet tall, and it weighs more than 12,000 pounds. And if you can imagine the block of marble that David was carved from, this was a seriously huge piece of marble. And Carrara marble back then at that time was some of the best, most expensive marble you could acquire, coming from the quarry at Carrara. So anyway, huge piece of marble, very valuable marble, unforgiving, right? If you screw up, then you screwed up. Like, that sucks. There's no erasing. And so, and even when Michelangelo got his hands on this marble, when he got this commission to do David, to create David from this marble, a previous artist had already dug into it. They had already chipped into it, so it was already not a perfect piece of marble that Michelangelo was working with. And still, he sculpted David out of this incredible piece of marble. And when someone asked him, how did you do this? Like, how did you even bring this into being? How did you do this? Michelangelo simply said, I just removed anything that was not David. So think about that. You've got this big piece of marble. So Michelangelo saw David with his mind's eye, he saw David within this massive block of marble. He could see him standing there. And he removed all of the marble that wasn't part of David. Now, he very much simplified this process, right? He very much simplified how he created David. But it's an interesting thing to think about. If you were given a block of marble and told to create something out of it, that's like to wrap, at least for me, to wrap my brain around just removing the unnecessary bits, the parts that aren't part of what I want to emerge from it, seems a little hard for me to visualize and wrap my head around, and there's a lot of anxiety that thought brings up. So I want you to think about this as you, like you're this block of marble, and you've even chipped away at things before, and maybe you got anxious, maybe there was too much pressure, maybe you got discouraged, maybe you got distracted, maybe you got scared, whatever. And there's the real you, your youest you, inside of this block of marble. And it's your job to remove anything from your life, your experience, your behaviors, your ways of thinking, your habits. Remove anything that is not part of who you truly are. Now, that's still kind of tricky, because then you're still stuck with the question of like, well, how do I decipher what's part of who I truly am? What's part of the unnecessary, bits that I don't need? What are the things that I've accidentally taken on from my environment, from conditioning, from what other people experienced, and then I took on as truth for me, and blah, blah, blah. That's still, it's still not easy, but it's an interesting thing to think about. It's an interesting thing to think about. Here's how you know when something isn't part of who you truly are. And this is going to feel a little simplified too, and you might feel some initial pushback on that. However, I want you to consider it. Just open your mind and consider what I'm saying. When things don't feel good, it could be that that's not part of who you truly are. Maybe you're not showing up as your best. Maybe you've taken on a bad habit that you feel like crap about because it's not a habit that actually belongs to you. Maybe you start fights because you're so frustrated with yourself because whatever, these behaviors that don't feel good, these things in your life that don't feel good, aren't a part of who you truly are. It's like, wearing shoes that belong to somebody else and they hurt your feet because they're not your shoes. So take them off. Take them off. And we all have things in varying degrees in our lives of things that just aren't ours. And it's hard to sometimes decipher what's ours and what's not. And it takes time and it takes questioning. You can look at the things in your life that don't feel good. Maybe you're in a job that doesn't feel good. Maybe you spend time with people that make you feel like crap. Maybe there's things in your environment that every time you look at them, you feel like crap. Why? Ask yourself, why? Why do I feel this way about this job or this group of people or this thing in my environment, because it might not necessarily be about the job. Maybe there's something in it that isn't quite right, that needs to be tweaked or that needs to be adjusted, or you just need to see it differently. Because I would also say, and I will say, I'm saying that if you can change your perspective about a thing, it can also change how you feel about the thing. So even if you're in a job that you hate and you figure out, okay, well, I don't really like the energy and attitude of my team. Okay, well, how can you elevate the energy and attitude of your team? How can you protect yourself from the energy and attitude of your team? It might not actually be about the job, it's about the energy and the attitude, and what can we do there? And is there anything to do there? And would it feel better to move on? Would it feel better to, you know, do something else? And you start asking yourself questions. But as this new year starts, there's all of these, like, we want to start new goals and start new habits and, you know, go forward and be, an improved version of ourselves, which I love. I love all of those things, and I greatly support all of those things. And in order to have space for those things, in order to have space to become the person that you want to become, to start the new habit, to, reach those goals, there's a removal process. There's things that you've got to take out. Your life is likely already very busy. You probably already don't have much downtime or time that you just sit and, twiddle your thumbs. So something has to be removed. You can't keep cramming things in. And habits will tell us that if you try to just cram things in, the things that you're trying to cram in will eventually just fall by the wayside, because your habits will take over, and your habits consist of all of the things that you've been doing the last year and the year before and the year before that. Your habits will take over, everything else will fall to the wayside. This is why people fall through on getting very far on their goals or on their habits or on whatever. They forget about them, they get distracted, they get discouraged, and their habits take over, and all of that just falls because there's no space for it anyway. And when you are trying to start something new and you haven't created space, when you get distracted, when it gets busy, when it gets hard, the thing isn't going to have anything to support it. And so you just drop it. And that's just what happens. Of course, there are other reasons to that too, and I do believe that I've gone into very much gone into goal setting, especially, let's see, it was in episode 202. So if you want all of my knowledge and wisdom and advice on goal setting, episode 202 is going to be there to support you, because there are other reasons why people don't follow through on their goals as well. And so I go into that in that episode. But here today, I want you to consider yourself as a block of marble. And maybe you've got some exposed portions of yourself from this block of marble. Maybe there's this nice defined shoulder, or we've got the leg going on, or whatever it is. There are parts of you, the true you, that are shining through already. There are. And there's probably still a lot of marble to remove so that we can see who you truly are. And that is when it's really valuable, because although there are like really famous half-done sculptures and, all of that, David is magnificent. One of the reasons is because he's complete, right? Like he is there. He shows up fully, powerfully as himself. And when you can remove all the marble that's obscuring who you truly are, you will show up magnificently and powerfully as yourself. And then the whole world can admire who you truly are as and original as as yourself. I've read a lot of quotes as I was looking for the Monday morning quote that'll go along with this episode. I read a lot of quotes about like, don't be a copy. An original is so much more valuable. And, that the world is trying to make us all the same, but the valuable thing is really just in being yourself. And we forget, because we're with ourselves all the time, how valuable being ourselves is. We forget that our uniqueness is a strength. We forget that the things that makes us weird or that makes us different are just part of who we are, and that's worth celebrating. Okay? So, this is what I have for you on our very first Friday of 2026. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. And as I have worked on this podcast from its block of marble and discovering what it is and giving it its life, I'm grateful to have you on this journey with me through all of the messy bits, through all of the dust, through all of the chaos, through maybe some rambly episodes, maybe some unorganizedness, whatever. It's all part of the charm, because one of the things I've always wanted for the podcast is that I wanted it to have a high level of realness, this high level of this is, this is who I am. This is who what the podcast is. It's not overly edited. It's not scripted. It's not overly done up, because this is just the real marble, right? We're not painting it up, and we're not putting gold foil on it, which, is great. Also, I love paint and I love gold foil, and heaven knows I love glitter. And we can show up as raw, and that can be valuable too, with both the podcast and myself and yourself. So that's what I want for you. Think about that today. Think about that this weekend, this week, this month, this year. Think about what to remove so that you can truly stand there in all of your 17-foot magnificence like David. Thank you for joining me today. I totally love you. Bye for now.